And so we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy in the most pleasant way. In our time together tonight, there is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story. A story about how the deepest human connections were once viewed not through the lens of the heart but through the cold, hard lens of a contract. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you feel so inclined, you could leave a comment, letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you there. It's a quiet way of knowing we're all here, in this peaceful space, together. And so we prepare for our descent. Let the room fade to black, feel the gentle rhythm of your heart, and let's sink softly into the depths of tonight's story. The air in the room is cold, not a crisp, refreshing cold, but a deep, ancient cold that seems to radiate from the very stones of the castle walls. You are in a small chamber, lit by the flickering, greasy light of a few tallow candles. The only sound, for a long moment, is the scratch of a quill on thick, stiff parchment. It's a sound that seems to absorb all the warmth from the room. You are not the bride. You are not the groom. You are simply a presence here, a quiet observer from a distant future, watching a world being built on principles that feel both alien and strangely familiar. Before you, at a heavy oak table, two men are hunched over the document. One is a father. You can see it in the tense set of his shoulders. He isn't looking at his daughter, who stands near the hearth, a slim silhouette in the dim light. He is looking at the words, the clauses, the promises of land and influence. The other man is her future husband, or rather, the legal representative of her future husband's family. To him, this is not a prelude to a union of souls. It is a merger. This is the bedrock of our story. In this time and place, marriage, especially for a woman of noble birth, has almost nothing to do with love. That's a concept for poets and singers, a dangerous, frivolous idea that has no place in the serious business of survival and power. A marriage is an alliance. It is a way of ending a feud between two families, or securing a border, or gaining a title that your own family has coveted for generations. You watch as the father points a thick finger at a line on the parchment. He is not asking if his daughter will be cherished. He is confirming the exact number of acres in the dowry. He is clarifying that the forest to the west comes with full hunting rights, and that the disputed mill on the river is included in the transfer of property. His daughter, standing by the fire, is the beautiful, living seal upon this deal. She is the most valuable part of the dowry itself. Her fertility is an unwritten clause, the promise of an heir who will one day inherit everything these two families are now combining. The groom, when he finally arrives for the ceremony, might be a stranger. He might be 20 years her senior, a man whose face is a map of old battles and whose hands are more used to holding a sword than a wife's hand. Or he might be a boy, even younger than her, a political placeholder, in a dynastic game he doesn't yet understand. It doesn't matter. His personal qualities are secondary to his name, his lands, and his lineage. And here's a detail that often gets lost in the grand sweep of history. It was just a one-way transaction. After the marriage was formally completed, the husband was often expected to give his new wife a gift. It was called the morning gift, a rather charming name for a very pragmatic tradition. It was the husband's payment, a token of appreciation for her virginity and her entry into his family. It might be a small estate, a purse of coins, a few prized animals, one of the few pieces of property a married woman might control outright. It was a business transaction from the moment of signing to the morning after. Historians and scholars still argue about the inner lives of these women. Some question if they were simply silent, passive pieces on a chessboard, moved about by their fathers and husbands. Others believe they understood the game better than anyone. Perhaps they knew that this cold contract was their only path to security, to influence. They might have learned to wield a different kind of power, the power of the household, the power of raising the next generation, the power of being the trusted advisor to a powerful lord who was, first and foremost, their business partner. We can't know for sure. The Parkmans only record the transfer of land, not the whispers in the dark. For now, just stay here in the quiet of the stone room. Listen to the final scratch of the quill. A blob of hot wax is dripped onto the bottom of the parchment. A heavy signet ring is pressed into it, leaving an impression that is as binding as any iron chain. The deal is done. She belongs to him now. Her name, her future, and most importantly for our story, her honor. It is no longer her own. It has become family property, and any stain upon it, it is a stain upon it, unexpected to deal with. The cold of the contract room seems to follow you, seeping into the very fabric of daily life. The scratching of the quill has been replaced by the rhythmic clatter of a loom, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and the low murmur of servants' gossip in the corridors. You find yourself now within the walls of the castle that is her new home, and you begin to see the world as she does, both physical and invisible. Her life is a map of prescribed spaces. The great hall, where she presides over meals at her husband's side, a silent and decorative symbol of his status. The solar, a private sitting room for the ladies, where the sunlight streams in through a narrow, glazed window, a rare luxury, illuminating the finest motes dancing in the air. The chapel where her piety is on public display, and her bedchamber, the most private and yet the most public room of all. For it is here that she must fulfill the most crucial clause of her marriage contract, to produce a male heir. You walk with her through these spaces. Notice how the world outside is always framed by a window, a doorway, an arrow slit. The sprawling fields, the dark woods, the winding road leading to the village, they are all part of her husband's domain, yet they are a world away from her. Her world is the inner world of the castle. She is its keeper, its most prized possession. She is never truly alone. From the moment she wakes to the moment she sleeps, she is attended by her ladies in waiting. These are not necessarily friends in the way you might understand it. They are her companions, yes, but they are also her minders, her chaperones. They are the eyes and ears of the household, and often of her husband. A quiet word from a lady in waiting, the hint of some impropriety, could be a very dangerous thing. So conversations are careful coded. Every interaction is layered with unspoken rules. Her duties are relentless and repetitive. She oversees the kitchens, ensuring the stores of grain, salted meat, and wine will last through the long, lean winter. She manages the spinning and weaving, the endless production of cloth for the household. She is an expert in herbal remedies, a de facto nurse for the castle's inhabitants, expected to know how to treat a fever, a cough, a wound from a hunting accident. She is the chief operating officer of a large and complex enterprise. This is her work. This is her purpose. But beneath the surface of this structured, dutiful existence, there is a quiet current of something else. It is a world of stories, of songs, of whispered tales, but it's a specific kind of love. The troubadours and poets who sometimes visit the castle sing of courtly love. This is a fascinating and often misunderstood concept. It was a kind of idealized, unattainable passion. A knight would devote himself to a high-born lady, almost always a married one. He would wear her colors in a tournament, write poetry to her beauty and virtue, and pledge to be her loyal servant. Crucially, this love was supposed to be chaste. It was about longing, not fulfillment. It was a game of intense emotion played within very strict boundaries, a way to experience passion without threatening the all-important marriage contract. It was a beautiful, elegant, and incredibly dangerous game, because, of course, the line between idealized devotion and actual desire is a very thin one. Historians still argue fiercely about whether courtly love was a genuine emotional outlet for the nobility or simply a literary fantasy. Some wonder if it was a sophisticated social ritual, or if it was, as some exasperated churchmen claimed, just a pretty excuse for bad behavior. You see her listening to one of these songs in the great hall after dinner. A young man with a lute sings of a knight pining for his lady, comparing her eyes to stars and her grace to a swan on a lake. Her husband, busy with a goblet of wine and a conversation about a border dispute, pays no mind. But she listens, and in her carefully composed expression, you can see a flicker of something, a yearning, not for the singer, not for the emotion itself, a yearning for a feeling that has no place in her well-ordered, walled-in world. She is a paradox. She is powerful, managing a vast household, and yet she is powerless, her own life path dictated by others. She is constantly surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. Her world is built on pragmatism and duty, yet it is haunted by songs of impossible, overwhelming love. And it is into this tightly controlled, and it is into this starved environment that a single spark of genuine, forbidden affection is about to fall. The days inside the castle walls are like beads on a string, each one nearly identical to the last. The same duties, the same duties, the same faces, the same muted light filtering through the high windows. It's a life of profound and suffocating routine, and it's in this great tapestry that a single new thread appears, vibrant and unexpected. He doesn't arrive with a grand entourage or the fanfare of a visiting lord. He is part of her husband's world, not hers. Perhaps he is a young knight, a younger son from a lesser noble house, sent to serve in her husband's retinue as a part of his training. Or maybe he is a clerk, newly hired for his skill with letters and numbers, tasked with helping the steward manage the castle's sprawling accounts. He could even be a page, a boy on the cusp of manhood, whose bright, curious eyes seem to see things the others have long stopped noticing. His station is below hers, but not so far below that their paths would never cross. You see the first moment their worlds intersect. It's not dramatic. It's almost nothing. She is walking through the bailey, the busy central courtyard of the castle, her ladies trailing a respectful distance behind. He is crossing the yard in the other direction, carrying a message or a ledger. Their eyes meet for just a fraction of a second longer than is strictly necessary. There is no smile, no nod, just a momentary pause, a flicker of mutual awareness in the midst of the daily bustle. And then it's over. He looks down, she continues on her way. But something has shifted. A single note in the monotonous song of her life has changed key. Unlike her husband, a man forged by war and politics, this newcomer brings with him a different kind of energy. He reads, not just ledgers and deeds, but perhaps poetry. In an age when literacy was a specialized skill, this alone sets him apart. One afternoon, In the solar, while her ladies are busy with their embroidery, he is summoned to read aloud. It's a common form of entertainment, but he doesn't read it right chronicle of past kings or a saint's life, one of the popular tales of chivalry and adventure. As his voice fills the room, you watch her. She sits with her needlework in her lap, her hands still, her gaze fixed on a point in the middle distance. He isn't just reading the words, he understands them. He gives the brave knight a voice of quiet courage and to the beautiful princess a voice of gentle dignity. He is not just performing a task, he is sharing a world. For the first time in a long time, someone is offering her an escape, a brief journey into and unpassionate, the land that lies just beyond her castle walls. His attention is different too. Her husband looks at her and sees the mother of his heir, the mistress of his castle, a symbol of his status. The other men of the court look at her with a formal, distant respect befitting her rank. But when this young man looks at her, he seems to see her. He notices the small things. He notices when she seems weary. He notices the way she arranges the flowers for the chapel altar. He might compliment her on a choice of color in a tapestry, a street, a small, seemingly innocent observation that is, in this context, startlingly personal. Here we stumble upon a curious and rather charming medieval belief. Some writers and thinkers of the time subscribed to what was called the extramission theory of sight. They believed that vision wasn't a passive process of light entering the eye. Instead, they thought that the eyes emitted invisible rays, and these rays literally went out and touched the object being looked at. So a glance was just a glance. It was a physical act. An intense gaze was a form of touch. You can imagine the power of that idea in a society with such strict rules about physical contact. A lingering look could feel as intimate and as dangerous as a hand on the arm. The seed of discontent is not planted by cruelty or neglect. Her husband is not a monster. He is simply a product of his time, fulfilling his role as he sees fit. The seed is planted by its opposite, by a quiet, gentle attention she didn't even know she was missing. It's the contrast that does it, the contrast between the cold, transactional nature of her marriage and the warm, personal interest of this newcomer. The contrast between her husband's talk of harvests and warfare and the young man's recitation of poetry. Historians debate the true prevalence of these affairs. The stories and poems are full of them, but we must wonder if they are a reflection of reality or just wish fulfillment. It's impossible to say, but we can imagine the psychology. In a life so starved of personal connection and emotional expression, even the smallest kindness, the most fleeting moment of shared understanding, could feel like a feast, and she's beginning to feel very, very, very hungry. Very hungry. It now feels like a cage. And for the first time she can see someone on the outside, someone who seems to be holding a key. The castle, which once felt like a fortress of security, now feels like a prison of glass. Every wall seems to have eyes. Every corridor seems to have ears. The air itself is thick with watchfulness. It is in this environment that a new language must be learned, a silent, secret dialect spoken only by two people. It begins as it must with the eyes. You've already seen how a single shared glance could be an event. Now, those glances become a conversation across the boisterous great hall, filled with the clatter of plates and the loud boasts of knights. A look can be exchanged. It's a marvel of subtlety. A quick, upward flick of his eyes to meet hers, held for a heartbeat that says, "I see you." A slow, deliberate lowering of her gaze to her lap that replies, "And I see you too." It's a language invisible to everyone else. A private island of communication in a sea of noise. Then come the objects. The world is full of things that can be imbued with secret meaning. A flower, for instance. She might be walking in the small, walled herb garden, the one place she can find a moment of relative peace. He is there, ostensibly to fetch some rosemary for the kitchens. As he passes, he might comment on the beauty of a single red rose. The next day, one of her ladies-in-waiting, who has a crush on the handsome young clerk, might be given a red rose by him. In her girlish excitement, places it in a vase in the solar. The lover never gives the flower to the lady directly. That would be impossibly reckless. But the message is delivered all the same. The red rose in the room glows with a meaning only two people understand. This practice of using flowers to convey messages, what we now call florography, became incredibly popular centuries later, but its roots are in this kind of coded communication. In a world with few outlets for direct expression, the natural world provided a perfect vocabulary. A sprig of ivy for fidelity, a lily for purity, a pansy, from the French word penser, meaning thought, to say, I am thinking of you. It was deniable. A flower is just a flower, after all. It was a letter. Then comes the most dangerous tool of all, the written word. Literacy, as we've seen, is a rare and powerful skill. A note, a letter, is a physical object that contains a dangerous secret. It cannot be passed by hand. The risk is too great. So, a complex and nerve-wracking system of drops must be devised. A loose stone in the chapel wall. A hollowed-out book in the small castle library. You watch as she walks past that urn, her ladies chattering behind her. Her hand drifts out, just for a second, and her fingers brush the inside lip of the clay pot. They find a small, folded piece of parchment. Her expression doesn't change. Her pace doesn't falter. But you can feel the sudden, frantic beating of her heart. The parchment feels like a hot coal in her palm. She must now carry it, hidden in a sleeve or a pouch, all the way back to the privacy of her bedchamber, praying that no one will ask her a question that requires her to use both her hands. The relief of finally being alone to read it is immense, quickly followed by the terror of what to do with it. Does she burn it? But the words are too precious. Does she hide it? But where? Every hiding place feels temporary and unsafe. Historians argue about how common this level of romantic intrigue really was. The great romantic poems of the age, like the tales of Lancel and Guinevere, are filled with these secret signs and dramatic near-misses. It's debated whether these tales are how to guide for aristocratic lovers, or if they are just exciting fiction for a bored audience. The truth is likely somewhere in between. While not every noble lady and knight was engaged in a clandestine affair, the language of it was part of the cultural air they breathed. They all knew the rules of the game, even if they weren't playing. You see them in the same room, perhaps during a long winter evening. The lord of the castle is playing chess with his steward. The ladies are embroidering. The lover is reading aloud again. He is reading a passage about a knight who must leave his beloved lady. He infuses the words with a quiet sadness. His eyes, for a moment, leave the page and find hers. And in that look, he is not the lady of the castle. They are the knight and the beloved in the story, for a fleeting, perfect second alone. The risk is exhilarating. The fear is a constant, cold presence. But the connection, the silent, secret language, feels more real than anything else in their carefully constructed lives. And they are both becoming very, very brave. Or perhaps very, very foolish. The world has shrunk to the size of a secret. The vast drafty halls, the bustling courtyard, the watchful eyes of the court, they have all become a kind of stage, a backdrop for a play that only two actors know they are in. But a stage is not enough. A stolen glance and a hidden note can only feed the heart for so long. The desire for a real, physical space, the place where the masks can be dropped, even for a moment, becomes an overwhelming need. They have to find a secret garden. Not necessarily a literal garden with flowers and vines, but any place that is forgotten, overlooked, and most importantly, private. In a castle, a place designed for communal living, such spaces are rare and precious jewels. It might be a disused storeroom at the top of a remote turret, filled with dusty barrels and old banners. It could be a small, secluded section of the battlements, one that offers a view of the setting sun but is rarely patrolled by the guard. Or perhaps it is, in fact, a garden, a small, overgrown patch behind the chapel, where the scent of wild thyme damp earth hangs in the air. You follow them there, moving like a ghost through the twilight. She has feigned a headache, a common inconvenient excuse for a lady to seek solitude. She has dismissed her attendants, asking them to fetch her a special herbal tonic that she knows will take them some time to prepare. That is her window. A stolen half hour, maybe less. Every second is borrowed time. He, in turn, has slipped away from his own duties. Perhaps he was meant to be checking the inventory of the armory, a tedious ask that no one will question or oversee too closely. His path to the meeting place is a different one, a route he has planned and rehearsed in his mind a dozen times. He moves through the shadows, his hearted rum against his rib. You are there when she arrives first, her cloak pulled tight around her. The air is cool. The silence is profound after the constant noise of the castle. For a moment, there is only fear. Every rustle of leaves is the sound of approaching footsteps. Every distant shout is a voice of discovery. She is about to turn back, to abandon this insane risk, when he appears. He doesn't rush to her. The first moments are filled with a hesitant, almost sacred quiet. The space between them is charged with all the words they couldn't write, all the feelings they couldn't show. And then, for the first time, he speaks her name. Not my lady, not milady, but her given name. In this context, it is the most intimate sound in the world. Here in their secret garden, the roles they play in the world outside fall away. She is not the lady of the manor, he is not the humble clerk or knight. They are just a man and a woman, standing in the twilight. The conversation is halting at first, a clumsy mixture of whispered confessions and anxious glances toward the path. He tells her he noticed the sadness in her eyes. She tells him his reading of the old poems makes simple. It's catastrophically dangerous. There's a strange detail from medieval life that fits here. The concept of time itself was different. For most people, time was not measured in minutes and hours, but by the sun, the church bells calling monks to prayer, and the rhythm of the seasons. This stolen half hour is not 60 neat little minutes. It is a while. It is the time between vespers and compline. This less precise, more fluid sense of time makes their secret meeting feel even more like a bubble, a space outside the normal, structured flow of the day. It has a beginning and an end, but the middle is a small eternity. Historians are, as ever, divided on the physical nature of these secret meetings. The courtly love poems are often coy, hinting at passion, but rarely describing it. Some scholars believe the ideal was to maintain a chaste, emotional intimacy, that the real thrill was in the shared secret itself, not in any physical act. Others argue this is naive, that human nature is what it is, and that these meetings almost certainly involve the very thing the poets were too polite to mention, probably varied wildly from one secret garden to the next. For this man and this woman, in this moment, the simple act of being near each other, of speaking freely, is the fulfillment. He might reach out and touch her hand, not her gloved hand, but her skin. The contact is electric, a jolt of reality in a world of performance. For her, it might be the first time in years she has been touched with simple and emanating affection, with no agenda of dynasty or duty attached. But the light is fading. The distant sound of a bell from the chapel tolls, signaling the end of their stolen time. The fear rushes back in, cold and sharp. They must leave separately, their paths retracing the careful steps they took to get here. The masks must be put back on. As she walks back towards the lighted windows of the great hall, she feels a mix of soaring joy and stomach-churning terror. The secret garden was real. It was everything she had hoped. Beautiful memory that she will carry with her back into the cage. The castle has a rhythm, a heartbeat. The lord of the manor, the husband, is the one who sets that rhythm. His moods, his plans, his comings and goings dictate the flow of life for everyone within its walls. He is a man accustomed to being in control. He manages his lands, his finances, and his man with a firm, pragmatic hand. He understands the world in terms of loyalty, strength, and tangible assets, and he is beginning to feel that one of his most valuable assets, his wife, is somehow out of tune. It's not a single dramatic event that triggers his suspicion. It's an accumulation of small, barely perceptible changes, a series of discordant notes in a familiar song. He is not a fool. He may be preoccupied with the larger matters of his domain, a border dispute with a neighbor, a bad harvest, a summons from his own overlord, but he is a man who has survived by noticing things that are out of place. It's the same skill that allows him to spot an ambush on a forest road or a weakness in a rival's defenses. You see it from his perspective now. You sit with him at the high table in the great hall. He watches his wife. She performs her duties as impeccably as ever. She is gracious, she is composed, but there is something different in her eyes. A distance. A light that seems to be kindled by a source he cannot identify. When he speaks to her, she answers correctly, but her attention feels as if it's being pulled from somewhere far away. It's like talking to a beautiful, hollow echo. He notices her patterns have changed. She, who always enjoyed the boisterous energy of the hunt, now seems to prefer the quiet of the solar. She develops an unusual interest in the chapel, spending long periods there in supposed prayer. She has more frequent headaches. These are all plausible, perfectly normal things for a lady of her station. But together, they form a subtle deviation from the woman he knows, or the woman he thought he knew. His gaze, sharpened by a nascent, unformed suspicion, begins to fall on the people around her. He is a predator sensing a disturbance in his territory. He watches the interactions. He sees the young clerk, the one with the clever hands and the smooth voice, reading poetry to the ladies. He sees the way the boy, for to him, the lover is just a boy, never looks directly at his wife, and he finds this overly correct behavior more suspicious than a bold stare. It's too careful. There's a fascinating, if slightly grim, aspect of medieval justice that sheds light on the husband's mindset. It's the concept of the hue and cry. If a crime was witnessed in a village, the witness was legally obligated to shout and raise an alarm. The entire community was then required to stop what they were doing and chase down the suspect. It was a collective responsibility. In the same way, the honor of the Lord was the collective responsibility of his household. If something was wrong, it wasn't just his problem. It was a threat to the stability of their entire world. His suspicion is not just personal jealousy. It feels like a civic duty. He starts to ask casual questions. He asks his steward about the new clerk's work. Is he diligent? Is he reliable? He asks his captain of the guard if anything is unusual in the castle routines. He might even make a gruff, seemingly offhand comment to one of his wife's older, more trusted ladies in waiting. The mistress seems distracted of late. Is she well? He is planting seeds of inquiry, using his network of loyal dependents to be his eyes and ears. He is not launching a formal investigation. He's just listening more closely to the castle's heartbeat, waiting for it to skip. The historical debate here is subtle but important. Were these powerful lords consumed by jealousy, or was it something colder and more calculated? Many historians argue that the primary emotion was not wounded love, but a profound sense of proprietary violation. His wife's fidelity was a direct reflection of his ability to command, to control, to hold his property. An affair was not just an emotional betrayal, it was a public statement that he was weak, that another man could trespass on his domain, take what was his, and get away with it. In a world built on reputation and the projection of strength, this was an existential threat. You are with him late one night. He stands on the battlements, looking down at his castle. The windows are dark, save for a few torches. It is all his. The stone, the land, the people sleeping within. He feels the cold grip of a doubt that is turning into a certainty. He doesn't know the what, or the who, or the where, but he knows with the instinct of a wolf that there is another scent in his den, and he will not rest until he has hunted it down. The rhythm of the castle is about to change from a steady beat to a frantic, galloping drum. It's rarely the grand, elaborate plan that fails. It's the small, mundane detail. A moment of carelessness, a simple human error. In a world of secrets and high stakes, the most devastating weapon is often a single piece of paper. The love affair has grown bolder, nurtured by its own success. The secret meetings have become a regular, intoxicating rhythm. The fear has not vanished, but it has been numbed by familiarity and passion. This is the most dangerous phase. The lovers have started to believe they are invisible, that their secret world is protected by its own magic, but the magic is about to run out. You are there to witness the moment of unraveling. It happens in the most ordinary of settings. Perhaps the lady is in the solar with her attendants, working on a large tapestry that depicts a famous battle from her husband's family history. The air is filled with the low hum of conversation and the soft pull of thread through canvas. She has the letter, the latest one from him, tucked securely into the sleeve of her gown. It's a foolish risk, keeping it on her person, but she cowldn't bear to destroy it yet. The words are a warm comfort against her skin. A sudden commotion at the door. A servant enters, flustered, announcing an unexpected visitor. Or perhaps one of her children runs into the room, crying over a scraped knee. There is a moment of distraction. She stands up quickly, her attention diverted, and as she moves, the small, folded piece of parchment which she thought was so secure works its way out of the loose fabric of her sleeve. It doesn't make a sound as it falls, pale square against the dark green reeds. She doesn't notice. In her concern for her child or her duty to the guest, the letter is forgotten. She leaves the room. The other ladies, their attention also on the small drama, don't see it fall either. The room is empty for a moment, save for you, the silent observer. You see the letter lying there, a tiny bomb waiting to detonate, and then someone else enters the room. It could be anyone. A servant coming to mend the fire, a lady then waiting returning to fetch her needle. But in this story, let's make it the husband. He has come looking for his wife, perhaps with a question about the evening meal or a piece of news from the outside world. He steps into the solar, his heavy boots rustling the rushes on the floor, and his sharp eyes, already primed for anything out of place, notice the small folded square. He stoops to pick it up. He is not a man who reads poetry. He is not a man given to sentiment. But he knows his wife's handwriting. And this is not it. The script is neat, precise, the hand of a clerk. He unfolds the parchment. There is a strange and sad little detail from history that comes to mind here. Paper and parchment were expensive. People rarely wasted them. They would often palimpsest, scrape off the old ink to reuse the surface. This meant that faint traces of previous texts sometimes remained. But this note, this is written on a clean, fresh piece of parchment. It was important. It was important. It was important. It was meant to be saved. The letter does not need to be explicit to be damning. In the coded language of courtly love, it might speak of the moon, of a star, of a shared psalm. It might mention the garden or the turret. To an outsider, it could be a fragment of a poem. But to the husband, whose senses are already on high alert, the meaning is clear. It's a confirmation of everything he has suspected. The vague, formless cloud of his doubt has just condensed into a single, hard. He stands there for a long moment in the quiet room, the piece of parchment in his hand. You can almost feel the shift inside him. The cool, calculating suspicion is instantly vaporized by a flash of white-hot rage. It is a rage that is part jealousy, yes, but it is much more than that. It is the fury of a king whose authority has been mocked. It is the anger of a merchant who has been stolen from under his own roof. Historians often debate the emotional landscape of the medieval nobleman. It's debated whether his anger was a performance, a necessary display to reassert his authority, or if it was a genuine, overwhelming passion. The answer is likely both. The anger was real, but its expression was also a calculated, political act. He had been publicly shamed, and his response had to be equally public and definitive. He doesn't crumple the letter. He folds it carefully, methodically, and tucks it into his own tunic. It is no longer of note. It is evidence. It is a warrant. He turns and walks out of the room, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. The time for observation is over. The time for action has begun. The castle's gentle rhythm has just stopped dead. And the silence that follows is the most terrifying sound of all. The silence that follows the discovery is not a peaceful one. It's the heavy, charged silence of a storm about to break. The husband does not confront his wife immediately. He does not seek out the lover. The first thing he does is secure his castle. He is a strategist, and his home has just become a battlefield. He speaks quietly to his captain of the guard, a man whose loyalty is to him and him alone. The gates are to be secured. No one is to enter or leave without his express permission. The patrols on the walls are to be doubled. He is isolating the players, turning their sanctuary into a cage. The lovers do not know that the trap has been sprung. They go about their day, unaware that the invisible walls are closing in. The lady returns to her solar, perhaps feeling a faint, nagging worry about the lost letter, a worry she dismisses as paranoia. The lover, in the scriptorium or the training yard, feels the familiar thrill of anticipation for their next secret exchange, oblivious to the fact that it will never come. The discovery itself is brutal and swift. There is no subtlety left, no room for games. The husband has the proof he needs. He chooses his moment. It might be late in the evening when the castle is settling down for the night. He doesn't go to the secret garden or the forgotten turret. He goes to the place where the transgression is most profound, his own bedchamber. You are there, a silent shadow in the corner of the room as the door is thrown open. It doesn't swing open gently. It bangs against the stone wall, the sound echoing like a thunderclap in the quiet chamber. The husband stands in the doorway, but he is not alone. Behind him are two of his most trusted men at arms, their faces grim, their hands resting on the hilts of their sword. The lady and the lover are there. Perhaps they were not in the midst of a passionate embrace. Perhaps they were just talking, sharing a final, stolen moment at the end of the day. The sheer audacity of them meeting here, in the heart of his domain, is the ultimate insult. The air freezes. The hushed words die in their throats. Their faces, which moments before were soft with affection, are now masks of pure, unadulterated terror. There is no shouting. The husband's voice when he speaks is terrifyingly calm. He holds up the small piece of parchment. He doesn't need to read it. He just lets them see it. It is their entire secret world, held between his thumb and forefinger. The lover's reaction is instinctive. He may be a poet and a dreamer, but he is also a man in a violent world. His first impulse is to draw the small dagger at his belt, or to shield the lady with his own body. But it is hopeless. He is outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Before he can even take a step, the men at arms are on him, their movements ruthlessly efficient. There is a brief, desperate struggle, more a spasm of defiance than a real fight. The lady can only watch, frozen, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She sees the man she loves, the man who brought poetry and light into her gray world, disarmed, bound, and handled with the rough indifference one would show to a poacher or a common thief. His face is a mess of confusion and fear. His eyes find hers one last time, a look of desperate, unasked questions. And then he is dragged from the room. There is a fascinating and rather bleak detail in some medieval legal traditions. It's the idea of being caught in flagrante delicto, in the very act of wrongdoing. If a thief was caught with stolen goods still in his hands, or a killer with a bloody knife, the normal process of trial and judgment could be bypassed. The guilt was considered self-evident. The husband, by orchestrating this discovery, has made the lover's guilt just as self-evident. He has created a live to blow of their crime. It's debated why this theatricality was necessary, why he didn't just deal with the lover quietly. Historians suggest it was about establishing an unshakable narrative. By having witnesses, his own loyal men, he cements his version of events. There can be no doubt, no rumor, no suggestion that he acted rashly or on mere suspicion. He has been demonstrably, publicly wronged. This is crucial for the steps that will follow. His actions from this point on are not the jealous rage of a husband. They are the righteous judgment of a lord. He doesn't speak to his wife. He doesn't even look at her. He simply turns and leaves, the heavy door closing behind him with a sound of absolute finality. She is left alone in the room, which now feels vast and cold. The scent of her lover's fear and the faint, coppery smell of his struggle hang in the air. The secret world has not just ended, it has been ripped apart, and the real world, in all its brutal, unforgiving clarity, has come crashing in. But now it is the silence of her tomb. The rage that follows is not the hot, fleeting anger of a moment. It's a cold, deep, and abiding fury. It settles over the husband like a shroud, and from his perspective, it is entirely justified. To understand the violence that is to come, you have to understand that in his mind, and in the minds of many of his peers, this is not a crime of passion, it is a crime of property. You are with the husband now, in his private council chamber. The captured lover is in a dungeon somewhere below, but he is not the focus of the Lord's thoughts. The focus is on the nature of the wound itself. He paces the stone floor, the sound of his boots echoing in the small room. He isn't weeping. He isn't lamenting a lost love. He is calculating the damage to his most valuable, intangible asset, his honor. Honor in this world is not a private, internal feeling of self-worth. It is your reputation, your social standing, your credit rating all rolled into one. It dictates who will follow you into battle, who will lend you money, who will ally with your family. A man with strong honor is a man to be respected and feared. A man whose honor is compromised is weak, a target, and the affair has made him a joke. It implies that he cannot control his own household. It suggests that his wife, a woman who carries his name and is supposed to be the vessel for his lineage, does not respect or fear him. By extension, if he cannot command loyalty in his own bedchamber, how can he command it on the battlefield? The lover has not just stolen moments of affection, he has stolen the husband's public face. He has committed an act of profound and symbolic theft. This is why the reaction is not heartbreak but rage. Heartbreak is a private sorrow. This wound is a public humiliation, and it requires a public remedy. The husband feels the imagined smirks of his rivals, the pitying looks of his allies, the whispers of the servants in his own halls. The very foundations of his authority feel like they are cracking beneath his feet. You can see the logic, cold and brutal as it is. The lover is not seen as a rival for the wife's affections. He is seen as a poacher. He has trespassed on the Lord's land and taken his prize game. He is a thief who has broken into the master's vault. The wife, in this grim calculus, is the property that has been trespassed upon, the prize that has been taken, the treasure that has been sullied. Her own feelings are almost entirely irrelevant to the equation. The crime is between the two men, the owner and the thief. There's a strange but illuminating concept from some early Germanic law codes, which formed the basis for much of medieval custom. It's the idea of the WER guild or man price. Every person had a price, a value set on their life according to their social rank. If you killed a person, their family was entitled to compensation equal to their WER guild. This shows how society viewed harm in terms of economic loss. While the lover's crime isn't murder, the principle isn't murder. He has caused a quantifiable damage to the husband's social and political standing. The punishment, therefore, must be a form of payment, a rebalancing of the books, and in this case, the payment will be extracted from the lover's own body. Historians continue to debate the exact balance of personal emotion versus social pressure in these situations. Was the husband truly more concerned with his public honor than his personal feelings? Or was the language of honor a socially acceptable framework through which to express a very real and painful sense of personal betrayal? It's a classic chicken and egg problem. The social expectation of rage likely amplified any genuine feelings of anger, creating a feedback loop that made a violent response almost inevitable. As the husband stands by the window, looking out at the dark courtyard of his castle, his decision is made. The rage has cooled now, solidifying into a hard, clear purpose. This will not be handled quietly. This will not be settled with a simple execution. The punishment must be as symbolic as the crime. It must be a message, a public statement designed to cleanse his sullied honor and to serving warning to any other man who might dare to trespass on what is his. And pride is a beast that demands a spectacular unbloody meal. He is no longer just a husband. He is a judge, and he is about to pronounce a sentence designed to restore his world to its proper order. The transition from lover to prisoner is brutally swift. One moment, he is a man of poetry, wit, and secret passions. The next, he is simply a body, a piece of evidence. The descent into the castle's underbelly is a journey into another world, a world where status and charm mean nothing. You follow him, not in body, but as a silent presence. The men-at-arms who drag him down the spiral stone staircase are not cruel for cruelty's sake. Their hands are rough. Their grips iron. They don't speak to him. He has been stripped of his name and his rank. He is no longer the clever clerk or the handsome knight. He is the prisoner. The air grows colder and damper with every step down. The torchlight flickers, casting long, dancing shadows on the curved walls. The sounds of the living castle above, the distant laughter, the music, the barking of dogs, fade away, replaced by the rhythmic drip of water and the scuttling of unseen things in the darkness. This is the place where the castle keeps its mistakes, its enemies, its inconvenient truth. The cell is small, carved from the bedrock beneath the castle's foundations. There is no window. The door is solid oak reinforced with iron straps, with only a small, grated hatch for passing through food and water. The mensch of him inside, and he stumbles onto the damp stone floor. They remove his bonds, but it is no comfort. The cell itself is a more effective restraint than any rope. The heavy door slams shut, and the sound is utterly final, metallic junk that echoes in the tiny space. And then there is only darkness. He is left alone with the sudden, shocking reality of his situation. The warmth of the lady's chamber, the scent of her perfume, the memory of her smile, they all evaporate in the face of this cold, damp, absolute blackness. His mind, which just hours ago was filled with romantic verses and daring plans, now has only one thought: survival. His status has been violently erased. In the world above, he had a place. He had a role, a name, a future. Down here, he has nothing. This is a key part of the process. Before the husband can pass judgment on the lover, he must first unmake him. He must strip him of his social identity until all that is left is the raw material of his crime. He is no longer a man who committed an act of transgression. He is the transgression. A peculiar detail of medieval life is the sheer variety of prisons. Not all dungeons were the deep, dark pits of fantasy. Sometimes a prisoner of high rank might be confined to a comfortable room in a tower, allowed books and decent food. But for a crime like this, against the Lord himself, the imprisonment is part of the penalty. It is designed to break the spirit, to terrify, to reduce. The sensory deprivation, the cold, the damp, they are all tools of psychological dismantling. As his eyes slowly, painfully adjust to the near total darkness, he can begin to make out the barest details of his world. The rough texture of the stone walls, the damp straw on the floor, which is likely teeming with vermin, the heavy, stagnant air that tastes of mold and despair. There is no bed, no blanket, nothing but the floor. It's debated why this immediate and harsh confinement was used. Historians suggest it served multiple purposes. Firstly, it isolated the prisoner, preventing any possibility of escape or rescue by his friends or family. Secondly, it was a cooling-off period, though not for the prisoner, but for the community. It allowed the Lord to demonstrate control and deliberation, to show that he was not acting in a fit but was proceeding with grim, judicial gravity. He is not just locking the man away, he is preserving him, like a piece of evidence for the trial that is to come. You stay with the prisoner in the dark for a while. You feel his terror, his disbelief. He replays the moment of discovery over and over. The door banging open, the husband's cold eyes, the lady's frozen face. He tries to make sense of it, but there is no sense to be made. He has flown too close to the sun, and his wings, woven from poetry and stolen glances, he has fallen from the sky and landed here, in the cold, hard earth. He is the central figure in a tragedy, and he knows, with a certainty that chills him to the bone, that the final act is yet to come. He is in chains, not of iron, but of stone and darkness and the absolute power of the man he has wronged. While the lover is plunged into the literal darkness of the dungeon, the lady is confined to a prison of a different kind. It is no less secure, but it is brighter, softer, and in some ways more cruel. She is not a common criminal. She is the lady of the castle, and her punishment, at this stage, must reflect her station. Her fall from grace is managed with a quiet, suffocating precision. Immediately after the lover is dragged away, her husband's orders are carried out. She is not thrown into a cell. She is escorted to a room high in one of the castle's towers. It might even be a room she knows well, a guest chamber perhaps, but it is now her cage. It is comfortable, furnished with a proper bed, a table, and a chair. There is a window, but it is high and narrow, looking out over the distant, indifferent countryside. It offers a view of a world she can no longer access. Her ladies in waiting are dismissed. They are sent away, some back to their families, others to different parts of the castle, their loyalty now suspect. They are replaced by two older women, stern-faced widows from her husband's family, who arrive with little more than a nod. They are not companions. They are guards. They do not speak to her unless necessary. They sleep on a pallet by the door. She is never, ever alone. This is a prison of shame. Every object in the room is a reminder of the world she has lost. The fine tapestry on the wall, the soft wool of the blanket, the silver cup she drinks from, they are all symbols of the status she has forfeited. Her husband, in his cold fury, has not stripped her of her comforts, but he has poisoned them. They are no longer the trappings of her rank, but the gilded bars of her cell. You sit with her in the suffocating quiet of the tower room. The hours stretch into an eternity. She does not know what has happened to her lover. Is he alive? Has he been sent away? The uncertainty is a form of torture in itself. She tries to question her guards, but they meet her pleas with stony silence. They are under strict orders. She is to be fed, clothed, and watched. What is her legal status now? This is a point of considerable historical debate. In some places and times, a husband had shocking latitude. The law might, in theory, allow him to repudiate her, to send her back to her family in disgrace, or even, in the most extreme and rare interpretations of ancient law, to kill her alongside her lover. However, by this period, the influence of the church was growing. The church viewed marriage as a holy sacrament, indissoluble. A husband could not simply cast his wife aside. He might be able to secure a separation, or he could choose to confine her for life. And so she waits. Her fate is entirely in her husband's hands. But her imprisonment serves a more immediate, symbolic purpose. She is a living symbol of the chaos that has been unleashed. By locking her away, the husband is demonstrating that he is restoring order. The offending part of his household has been identified, isolated and contained. He is cleansing his house, and she is the stain that is being scrubbed away. There is a strange, almost theatrical element to this. Think of the concept of ritual purification. In many ancient cultures, when a taboo was broken, a ritual had to be performed to restore balance to the community. The lady's confinement is a kind of purification rite. She is removed from the community so that the community can begin to heal, to forget, to realign itself around the authority of its Lord. She has no power here. She cannot appeal to her family because by her actions, she has brought shame upon them as well. Her father, the man who signed the marriage contract, would likely see her as a damaged asset, a failed investment. She cannot appeal to the law because the law is embodied by the very man she has wronged. She can only appeal to God, and she spends long hours in the small chapel alcove of her room, praying for a miracle that she knows will not come. She is not being punished for her love. She is being held as a trophy of her husband's victory. She is the living proof of his righteousness, the justification for the terrible vengeance he is about to enact upon her lover. Her presence in that tower, silent and sequestered, is a constant, looming backdrop to the main event. Her fate is tied to his, but she is forced to be a spectator, locked away from the brutal climax of the story. Every sound from the courtyard below, a raised voice, the clang of metal, sends a fresh wave of terror through her. She is waiting for the other shoe to drop, and she fears, with every fiber of her being, that when it does, the sound will be unbearable. The husband now holds all the cards. He has the confession in the form of the letter. He has the culprits caught in a compromising, if not definitive, situation. He has the lover in a dungeon and the wife in a tower. Now comes the crucial decision, what to do next. In our modern world, the answer would be clear: a formal trial, lawyers, a judge, a jury. But in the medieval world, the path of justice was often a much shorter and more direct one. You find yourself standing in the shadow of a chilling and powerful concept, one that echoes from a more ancient, tribal past, the right of the husband to be his own judge and executioner. This wasn't the law everywhere, and by the high Middle Ages it was becoming increasingly rare and contested. But the idea of it, the cultural memory, was still potent, especially in isolated, rural domains where the Lord's word was absolute. This was not seen as murder. It was seen as a righteous execution, a private act of justice for a private crime. The logic, in its own brutal way, was simple. The crime was committed against the husband's honor and property, within his own domain. Therefore, he was the injured party, the judge, and the legitimate enforcer of the sentence, all rolled into one. The state, the king, the formal courts, they were distant entities. Justice, in this view, was a local matter. Let's imagine the husband is a man who cleaves to these old ways. He sees no need for a public spectacle, no need for the judgment of his peers. The guilt is obvious. The sentence is clear in his mind. He gathers a few of his most loyal, tight-lipped retainers. Under the cover of darkness, they descend the stone steps to the dungeon. There is no last statement. There is only the grim, silent work of vengeance. The lover, huddled in the dark, hears the bolt being thrown. Hope, a foolish, flickering candle, ignites in his chest. Is he being released? Is he being taken to a trial? The door creaks open, and the torchlight floods the cell, blinding him. He sees the husband's face, cold and impassive as a stone effigy, and he knows, this is not a trial. This is where the story takes a turn that is difficult for us to comprehend. The punishment is not a swift, clean death. It must fit the crime. The crime was one of illicit passion, of trespassing on the husband's most intimate territory. Therefore, the punishment is often aimed at the source of that passion. It is a symbolic unmanning, a physical and social destruction that leaves the victim alive but utterly broken. It is a fate that many would consider worse than death. There's a fascinating and grim parallel in a form of medieval trial known as the judicial duel or trial by combat. Two parties in a dispute could, in some cases, fight to the death. The winner was deemed to be in the right, as it was believed God would grant victory to the just. This law of the husband is a perversion of that idea. There is no combat, no chance for divine intervention. The husband's court is a one-sided affair where the verdict has been decided long before the proceedings have even begun. Historians debate how often this kind of private, summary justice actually occurred. The written laws of the time were often a confusing patchwork of Roman law, Germanic custom, and church doctrine. A lord who took this path was taking a risk. If the lover's family was powerful, they could appeal to the king or a higher authority, claiming the lord had overstepped his bounds and committed murder. This could lead to fines, confiscation of land, or even war. This path was most likely taken when the lover was of a significantly lower social status. A clerk, a page, a landless knight, someone whose life was, in the cold arithmetic of the age, worth less than the risk of reprisal. The husband who chooses this path is making a statement. He is declaring that his authority in his own domain is absolute. He is placing himself above the burgeoning power of the church and the centralized courts. He is a law unto himself. By taking his vengeance in the dark, he is not hiding his crime. He is demonstrating that he does not consider it a crime at all. It is a re-establishment of the natural order. He is pruning a branch that has grown in the wrong direction, cutting out a sickness before it can spread. And the tool he uses is not the surgeon's scalpel of the court, but the brutal, personal axe of the wronged patriarch. The world of the castle is not an island entire of itself. It is part of a larger continent, a complex web of competing powers. And in the medieval period, there were two great forces constantly wrestling for control over the souls and laws of men, the temporal power of the lords and kings, and the spiritual power of the church. The fate of our lover often depended on which of these two forces held greater sway in his particular corner of the world. Let's imagine our husband is not an old-school traditionalist. Perhaps he is more modern, more politically astute. Or perhaps the local bishop is a particularly powerful and meddlesome man. The husband knows that a swift, private execution, however satisfying, could bring him into direct conflict with the church. And that is a fight that even a powerful lord can lose. You are now a witness to this quiet, intense struggle. A priest arrives at the castle. He is not just any local clergyman. He is a man of learning, dressed in simple but well-made robes, and his calm demeanor is a stark contrast to the simmering violence within the castle walls. He has heard of the trouble as the church hears of everything, and he has come to intervene. He meets with the husband in the council chamber. It is a tense and fascinating confrontation. The lord, representing the ancient law of the land and the rights of the nobility, stands on one side. The priest, representing the universal law of God and the authority of the church, stands on the other. The husband argues that this is a private matter, an offense against his honor, his property, his house. He has the right to deal with the offender as he sees fit. He might cite ancient customs, the traditions of his forefathers. He is speaking the language of feudal obligation and personal vengeance. The priest counters with a different language altogether. He speaks of sin, of repentance, of the sanctity of human life, even the life of a sinner. He argues that all justice flows from God, and the church is God's instrument of justice on earth. A man cannot be his own judge. Vengeance belongs to the Lord, both the heavenly Lord and, by extension, the ecclesiastical courts. He warns the husband that to shed blood without a proper trial is to commit the mortal sin of murder. This would put the husband's own immortal soul in jeopardy. And, more to the point, it would invite the wrath of the church. The church had powerful weapons. The most terrifying was excommunication. To be excommunicated was to be cut off from the church, and therefore from God. You could not receive the sacraments. You could not be buried in consecrated ground, and it was believed your soul was damned to eternal torment. For a genuinely pious man, this was a fate worse than death. But even for a cynical lord, it was a political disaster. Excommunication could release his vassals from their oaths of loyalty. His knights would no longer be obligated to fight for him. His rivals could declare a holy war against him. It was the ultimate social and political cancellation. A lesser, but still potent weapon was the interdict. A bishop could place an entire region under interdict. This meant that all the churches in the Lord's domain would be closed. No masses could be held, no weddings, no baptisms, no last rites. The entire community was held spiritually hostage to force their Lord to submit. This tension between secular and ecclesiastical law is one of the defining themes of the Middle Ages. The famous conflict between King Henry II of England and his Archbishop Thomas Becket was, at its heart, about this very issue: who had the right to judge a wrongdoer, the king's court or the church's court. It was a struggle that played out in grand royal palaces and in small, remote castles just like this one. So the husband has a choice. He can defy the priest, embrace the old ways, and risk the wrath of the church. Or he can yield, handing the lover over for a formal trial, and allow justice to take a different, slower, but perhaps no less terrible course. His decision often depended on the political climate. Was the king strong and supportive of the church? Was the local bishop a formidable political player? Or was the church's influence in this region weak? Let's say he yields. The priest has made his point. The husband, fuming but pragmatic, agrees to a formal proceeding. He has not surrendered his rage, merely channeled it. He will let the church or a secular court do his work for him. He will play the part of the wronged party, confident that any court, ecclesiastical or otherwise, will see the crime as he does. The lover is brought up from the dungeon, blinking in the sudden light. He is no longer destined for a swift end in the dark. He is now a pawn in a much larger game, a symbol of the great, ongoing battle between the Lord and the bishop, the sword and the cross. The path that justice takes is rarely a straight line. It bends and curves depending on who you are. Now that the lover has been spared from immediate, private vengeance, his fate hinges on a question of profound importance in the medieval world. What is his social rank? The law, in its majestic impartiality, was supposed to apply to all, but in practice, the scales of justice were heavily weighted by class. Let's explore the different paths his life might take, based entirely on the circumstances of his birth. First, imagine the lover is, as we've mostly pictured him, a man of low station. A clerk from a merchant family, a landless knight, a talented but common-born page. In this scenario, he is in the gravest danger. He has no powerful family to speak for him, no one to plead his case or threaten retaliation. He is a lone actor, and he has committed the ultimate social transgression. He has crossed the streams of the class system. He has not only trespassed property, but he has also dared to rise above his station. For this man, The trial, whether it's in the Lord's court or the bishop's, is largely a formality. The outcome is all but certain. The husband, a powerful nobleman, will present his case. The evidence of the letter, the testimony of his men at arms who witnessed the discovery, it will be overwhelming. The lover will have no one to speak in his defense. His word against a lord's is worth less than nothing. The sentence will be harsh, designed not just to punish him, but to reinforce the social order he has violated. This is the man who is most likely to face the gruesome, symbolic punishments we will explore later. His body will become a billboard for the message, know your place. Now let's change the scenario. Imagine the lover is not a commoner but a nobleman himself, perhaps a visiting knight from a neighboring estate, or even a relative of the husband, a cousin staying at the castle. This changes the equation completely. The crime is the same. The husband's rage is just as real, but the consequences are vastly different. This is no longer a simple matter of a lord punishing an inferior. It is a dispute between two noble houses. If the husband harms the lover, he risks starting a blood feud. The lover's family will demand satisfaction. This could lead to years, even generations, of retaliatory violence, ambushes on the road, burned crops, and open warfare. It's a messy, expensive, and dangerous business. A pragmatic lord would think twice before starting a fire that could burn down his own house. In this case, the matter is more likely to be settled through negotiation. Emissaries will be sent. The lover will be held in custody, while the two families work out a deal. The solution is often financial. The lover's family will be forced to pay an enormous sum of money, a shame guild, to compensate the husband for the damage to his honor. They might have to cede a piece of land, a mill, or a forest. The lover himself will likely be sent away in disgrace, perhaps forced to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, a convenient, pious form of exile. He might be disinherited. His life will be ruined, but it will be spared. The matter is treated less like a crime of passion and more like a breach of contract, settled with a transfer of assets. Finally, let's consider the most dramatic and rarest of possibilities. Imagine the lover is of a higher rank than the husband. What if he is a great duke, a powerful earl, or even a member of the royal family? Now, the husband is the one in terrible danger. He has been wronged, yes, but to accuse or harm a man of such immense power is to risk his own complete destruction. He has caught a wolf in his house, and he is armed with nothing but a stick. In this impossible situation, a wise husband might choose a terrible but necessary path, to see nothing, to know nothing. He might swallow his pride, burn the incriminating letter, and pretend the affair never happened. The risk of acknowledging the truth is simply too great. The honor he would save by seeking vengeance would be buried with him in the ashes of his castle. This brutal calculus of rank is a fundamental, if unwritten, law of the time. There's a cynical Latin proverb that was popular in the Middle Ages which translates to, "What is permissible for Jupiter is not permissible for an ox." It perfectly captures the reality of the two-tiered justice system. The powerful could get away with things that would mean a horrific end for a commoner. So, as our lover stands before his accusers, his entire identity is being weighed, not just his actions, but his lineage, his land, his connections. His fate will be decided not only by what he did, but by who he is. And for our story, we will return to the most vulnerable of these men, the commoner, the clerk, the man with no one to speak for him. For it is on his body that the law will be written most clearly. The decision has been made. The lover, being a man of low station, will not be dispatched in a dark cellar or exiled through quiet negotiation. His crime was a public humiliation for the Lord, and therefore his punishment must be a public spectacle. The trial, when it happens, is less a search for truth, which is already considered established, and more the first act in a grim piece of civic theater. The stage is set in the castle's great hall. This is the heart of the community, the room where feasts are held, justice is dispensed, and the Lord's power is most visible. Banners bearing the husband's coat of arms hang from the rafters. The Lord himself sits on a high-backed chair on a raised dais, transforming his seat of honor into a judge's bench. His chief retainers and allies are seated near him, a jury of his peers whose verdict is already assured. The rest of the hall is filled with the castle's inhabitants. The servants, the stable hands, they are all required to attend. This is not optional. They are the audience, and their presence is crucial. They must witness the re-establishment of their Lord's authority. They must see the consequences of challenging the social order. This performance is for them. The lover is brought in, blinking in the torchlight after the gloom of the dungeon. He is gaunt, pale, and dressed in simple, rough clothing. His chains have been removed for the trial, but he is flanked by 2 large guards, a clear symbol that he is not a free man. He is made to stand in the center of the hall, alone, the focus of every eye in the room. The proceeding is not a debate. It is a declaration. The husband, or his steward, lays out the charges. He presents the evidence. The letter, now handled like a sacred relic of betrayal, is read aloud. Its poetic, coded language sounds foolish and damning in this stark, public setting. The men-at-arms who discovered the lovers are called to give their testimony. It is brief, factual, and unassailable. The lover is then given a chance to speak. What can he say? He can deny it, but his word is meaningless against the Lord's. He can confess and beg for mercy, but mercy is not on the agenda. He might try to defend the lady, to claim it was all his doing, a last, futile act of chivalry, but this only deepens his guilt in the eyes of the court. He has not only committed adultery, he is now openly boasting of his conquest. Every word he speaks digs his own grave a little deeper. This is where the concept of the ordeal comes to mind, though in a slightly different form. In earlier medieval times, a formal trial by ordeal was sometimes used when evidence was lacking. An accused person might be forced to carry a hot iron bar or be submerged in water. If their wound healed cleanly, or if they sank and were quickly pulled out, they were deemed innocent, as God had protected them. By this later period, such ordeals were being phased out by the church as superstitious. But the trial in the Great Hall is a new kind of ordeal, a social ordeal. The lover is subjected to the full weight of public shame and condemnation. His guilt is proven not by hot iron, but by the hostile stares of the entire community. There is, of course, a debate among historians about the uniformity of these proceedings. Legal practices varied enormously from region to region. In some parts of France or England, a more formal, structured legal process, influenced by reviving Roman law, might have been followed. Might have been a prosecutor and a more structured defense. But in many places, the justice of the local lord, especially for a crime this personal, was swift, theatrical, and designed to leave no doubt. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. The Lord confers briefly with his advisers in a pantomime of deliberation. Then he stands and delivers the sentence. His voice rings out in the silent hall. The lover is found guilty of trespassing against his Lord, of violating the sanctity of his household, and of irrevocably staining his honor. The sentence is not a simple, clean death. Death would be an escape. The sentence is to be a living lesson. It is a punishment to be carried out on his body, a series of symbolic acts designed to mirror and erase his crime. The crowd does not cheer, but you can feel a collective sigh of something that is not quite relief, but a grim satisfaction. The order of their world, which had been thrown into chaos, is now being violently set right. The spectacle has been a success. The husband's authority has been reasserted. The community has been reminded of the rules. And the lover, standing pale and trembling in the center of the hall, is no longer a person. A terrible masterpiece of justice is about to be painted for all to see. The sentence has been passed, and now the first part of the grim payment is to be exacted. The punishment must be symbolic, a physical inscription of the crime onto the body of the criminal. And what was the first step in the crime? It was a look, a stolen glance, a gaze that communicated a secret world of desire. The eye was the window through which the sin entered, and so the window must be shattered. The punishment of blinding was a terrifyingly common one in the medieval world, used for a variety of offenses, but it was particularly suited for a crime like this. It was not intended to kill, but to create a living ghost, a man trapped in a perpetual, inescapable night. It was a punishment of profound and horrifying poetry. You are there in the castle courtyard. The spectacle has moved from the great hall to the open air, under a gray and unforgiving sky. The entire household is once again assembled, a silent, grim-faced audience. The lover is brought out and tied to a thick wooden post in the center of the yard. He is shirtless, his fear a cold sweat on his skin. He can see the faces in the crowd, people he once worked with, ate with, shared a joke with. Now they are expressions, a mixture of pity, fear, and a dark, morbid curiosity. The man who steps forward is not a brutish executioner. He might be the castle's blacksmith, a man of immense strength and precision, or perhaps a barber surgeon whose knowledge of the human body is rudimentary but practical. He carries the tool of his trade. It could be a small, sharp knife, or in a more brutal fashion, a heated iron rod or a specialized tool with a rounded, spoon-like end. The logic behind blinding was multifaceted. Firstly, it was an act of purification. The eyes that had looked upon the forbidden, the Lord's wife, with lust were now being destroyed, cleansed by pain. The source of the visual temptation was being eliminated. Secondly, it was a social death. In a world without social safety nets, a blind man was almost completely helpless. He could no longer work as a scribe, a soldier, or a farmer. He was reduced to begging, forever dependent on the charity of others. He was a constant, walking reminder of the consequences of his actions. Every day, as he fumbled his way through the world, his punishment would be renewed. He could no longer see the beauty of the world, just as he had tried to take a beauty that was not his. There's a strange and disturbing detail found in some historical accounts of this punishment. Sometimes a piece of leather or a bowl was placed between the victim's teeth. This was not an act of mercy to prevent him from crying out. It was to prevent him from biting off his own tongue in the agony of the moment, an act which would have granted him the mercy of a quicker end through blood loss. His survival was a necessary part of the sentence. The husband stands and watches, his face a mask of stone. This is the first payment on the debt to his honor. He is taking from the lover the very sense that initiated the crime. The man who dared to look upon his property with desire will now look upon nothing at all. He will be plunged into the same darkness as the dungeon he just left, But this time the dungeon will be inside his own head, and there is no escape. Historians debate whether these punishments were carried out with surgical precision or brutal haste. Some accounts suggest a grim level of skill, aiming to destroy the optic nerve without causing massive, life-threatening damage. Others imply it was a much messier, more violent affair, where survival was not always guaranteed, even if it was intended. It depended on the skill of the executioner and the constitution of the victim. The act itself is swift, a moment of intense, unimaginable pain. A scream, muffled by the leather in his mouth. And then it is over. The blacksmith or surgeon steps back. The lover slumps against the post, a broken figure. The crowd is silent, the lesson sinking in. The man who had a vision of a light beyond his station now has no vision at all. He has been unseen, erased from the world of world, has been reduced to a universe of sounds, smells, and the unending memory of the last thing he ever saw, the cold, righteous face of the man he wronged. The physical torment is not over. The logic of the punishment must be followed to its brutal conclusion. The crime was not just one of sight, it was a crime of illicit succession, a threat to the purity of the bloodline. The lover, by his actions, had symbolically attempted to plant his own seed in the Lord's field. He had tried to usurp the husband's most fundamental role, the procreation of a legitimate heir. Therefore, the punishment must strike at the very root of this transgression. The lover, still reeling in a world of new and absolute darkness, remains tied to the post. The first part of his sentence has been carried out, but the second, and in many ways the most devastating, is about to begin. The crowd has not dispersed. The lesson is not yet complete. The same man who performed the blinding, or perhaps another with a different, sharper set of tools, steps forward once more. The sentence is castration. In the cold, symbolic calculus of medieval justice, this was the ultimate punishment for this specific crime. It was a perfect, horrifying mirror of the offense. To our modern sensibilities, this is an act of almost unimaginable cruelty, but to the medieval mind, it was imbued with a deep and complex set of meanings. Firstly, and most obviously, it was a direct and permanent prevention of any future transgression. The man who had used his virility to threaten the Lord's lineage was now rendered incapable of threatening any lineage, forever. Secondly, it was the ultimate social degradation. In a patriarchal society that prized male heirs and masculine strength above all else, to be unmanned was to be rendered less than a man. It was to be placed in a third category, a liminal space between male and female, belonging to neither. The victim lost not just his physical attributes, but his legal and social standing as a man. He could not inherit property in the same way, could not marry, could not fulfill any of the roles expected of a man in his society. He was, in a very real sense, erased from the social fabric. There is a strange and telling detail from the language of the time. The men who guarded harems in the Byzantine and Ottoman empires, the eunuchs, were seen as safe guardians precisely because they lacked the ambition that was believed to be tied to masculinity. By castrating the lover, the husband is not just punishing him, he is symbolically turning him into a harmless, ambitionless creature. He is transforming the threatening rival into a eunuch, the ultimate symbol of an unman, a safe and sexless being. It is the most profound humiliation imaginable. The procedure itself was, of course, fraught with peril. In an age without antibiotics or proper understanding of infection, the chances of dying from sepsis in the days following the mutilation were incredibly high. This leads to a debate that still occupies historians. Was this punishment intended to be a slow, agonizing death sentence, or was survival the goal? The answer is likely a bit of both. If the victim died, it was seen as God's will. He served as a more powerful and permanent warning. His continued existence as a broken, incomplete man was a living sermon on the consequences of his sin. As the act is carried out, the crowd watches in stunned silence. This is not a battle. There is no glory here. This is something more primal, more terrifying. It is the physical manifestation of the Lord's power, a demonstration that he has control not just over the lives of his subjects, but over their very bodies, their identities, their futures. The lover, already lost in a world of pain and darkness, experiences a new dimension of agony. It is a pain that goes beyond the physical, a deep, shearing wound to his very soul. He is being unmade, piece by piece, in front of the world. When it is done, he is cut down from the post. He collapses to the ground, a heap of bleeding, blinded, broken humanity. He is no longer a rival, no longer a threat, no longer even a man in the eyes of his community. He is just a thing, a piece of wreckage washed up on the shore of the Lord's rage. The husband has not just taken his sight and his future. He has paid the debt owed to his honor with the currency of another man's entire being, written in blood and suffering for all to see. For some crimes, even the terrible spectacle of a living, broken man is not enough. The punishments of blinding and castration were designed to destroy the man while preserving the body as a walking lesson. But what if the crime was considered so profound, so heinous, that it was seen not just as an insult to the husband, but as an attack on the very fabric of society itself? In that case, the lesson had to be written not on a single, broken body, but across the landscape of the entire domain. Let's imagine the husband or the court decides the lover's crime was not merely adultery, but a form of treason. This was a common legal interpretation. The lady's body was the vessel of the legitimate bloodline. To introduce an illicit element into that vessel was to threaten the succession, to potentially place a bastard in the seat of power. This was an attack on the political stability of the lordship. It was an attempt to tear the ruling family apart from the inside. The punishment was to be torn. This is the grim logic that leads to dismemberment. It is the ultimate punishment, reserved for traitors and those who commit the most unspeakable crimes against the social order. The goal is no longer to create a living ghost. It is to obliterate the offender so completely that he ceases to exist as a unified entity, both in this world and, it was believed, in the next. The execution now moves beyond the castle walls. It becomes a public procession, a final horrifying piece of theater. The lover, likely already dead from a more merciful hanging or beheading that precedes the main event, is brought to a scaffold. The symbolism is paramount. His body, which sought a forbidden unity with another, will now be violently disunified. You witness the cold, methodical nature of it all. The body is quartered, divided into 4 parts. This number was not arbitrary. It resonated with deep symbolic meaning, the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 seasons, the 4 humors of the body. To quarter a man was to deconstruct his personal cosmos, to reduce him to his base components. And then comes the most crucial part of the message. The parts are not buried together. They are sent out to the 4 corners of the Lord's domain. The head might be placed on a spike above the main gate of the castle, a permanent, silent warning to all who enter. One arm might be sent to the most important market town in the east. They leg to a rebellious village in the west. Each piece becomes a separate, grisly landmark. The man who tried to destabilize the realm is now used to mark its boundaries. This practice is most famously associated with the English punishment for high treason, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. It's a phrase we know, but the reality was a complex, multi-stage ritual of annihilation. The drawing referred to being dragged on a hurdle through the streets. The hanging was to the point of near death, followed by the disembowelling and, finally, the quartering. It was a complete systematic destruction of the traitor. It's debated why this need for such a distributed and gruesome display was necessary. Historians and anthropologists still argue about its primary function. Was it simply a brutal deterrent, a form of state-sponsored terror designed to make the consequences of treason so viscerally horrifying that no one would dare attempt it? Or was it something deeper, a form of ritual purification? Some scholars suggest it was a necessary, violent sacrament to cleanse the body politic. The traitor was a disease within the community, and his body had to be surgically removed and its tainted parts scattered to the winds to prevent the sickness from spreading. The community, by witnessing this, participated in its own cleansing. The lover's crime, in this context, has made him a traitor to the microcosm of the lordship. His physical body is made to mirror his political crime. He tried to tear the social fabric, so his body is torn. He threatened the integrity of the domain, so his body is used to reinforce its border. There is no grave for this man. There is no single place for his family to mourn. There can be no proper Christian burial, which was believed to be essential for the resurrection of the body on Judgment Day. This, in the medieval mind, was the ultimate terror. His punishment extended beyond death into eternity. He was denied the hope of being made whole again, even in the afterlife. The lover is gone. He has been transformed from a person into a concept, a collection of warnings scattered across the map. Each child in a distant village might grow up with the story of the rotting limb nailed to the town gate, a story that serves as a permanent and powerful lesson about the consequences of forbidden love and ambition. The man is gone, but the message, written in his very flesh, endures. After confronting such brutal, symbolic acts of justice, a question naturally arises in the quiet of your mind. How common was this really? Did every wronged husband in the medieval period respond with such theatrical, horrifying violence? The answer, like so much in history, is complicated, and it's a subject of ongoing debate among scholars. You are now in a quieter space, a dusty library perhaps, far from the cries of the courtyard. The adrenaline has faded, replaced by a more contemplative mood. Before you are the scattered sources that historians have to work with: legal codes, court records, chronicles written by monks, epic poems, and folk songs. Each one tells a different part of the story, and they often contradict each other. The legal codes are the first piece of the puzzle. You can read them, translated from the Latin or Old French. They are often shockingly blunt. Some early Germanic codes, like those of the Lombards or Visigoths, do indeed grant the husband the right to kill both the wife and her lover if they are caught in the act. The laws are written in black and white. But this is where the first problem arises. The law on the books is not always the law in practice. The law might exist as a fossil from an earlier, more violent era, a relic that was rarely, if ever, enforced by the later Middle Ages. Then there are the court records. These are fascinating, but frustratingly incomplete. They mostly record cases that were actually brought to a formal trial. They tell us about fines being paid, lands being confiscated, and sentences of exile or imprisonment. They are full of stories of adultery, but the punishments recorded are often far more mundane than what we've witnessed. This could mean one of two things. It could mean that the more brutal punishments were exceedingly rare, a thing of myth and legend, or it could mean that those punishments, being a form of private justice, happened outside the court system and therefore left no written record. The silence in the archives is not necessarily proof of absence. This leads to the most compelling and controversial question for historians. Were these extreme punishments primarily threats? Was the idea of being blinded or castrated the real weapon? It's possible that the specter of these horrifying fates was so effective that it acted as a powerful deterrent. A lord might ensure that everyone in his domain knew he had the right to inflict such a penalty, making it far less likely he would ever have to. Brutal punishment could echo for generations, doing the work of a dozen actual executions. It was a form of psychological warfare where the fear of the punishment was more important than the punishment itself. Then you turn to the chronicles and the literature, the stories and songs. Here, the bloody punishments are everywhere. The tales of chivalric romance are filled with jealous husbands enacting terrible vengeance. The songs of the troubadours warn of the dangers of being discovered. But this, too, is a tricky source. Is a poem describing a reality, or is it creating an exciting, sensationalized fiction for its audience? A story about a fine being paid is not nearly as entertaining as a story about a man being torn apart by horses. Literature needs drama, and these punishments were nothing if not dramatic. So, where does that leave us? The academic consensus, if one can be said to exist, is that these extreme, symbolic mutilations were not an everyday occurrence. They were not the standard response to adultery. The more common outcomes were likely financial settlements, public shaming, or in many cases, the affair simply being ignored or tolerated, especially if it was discreet and didn't threaten the public honor of the husband. However, this does not mean these brutal acts never happened. They were likely reserved for the most egregious cases, the ones that represented a profound threat to the lord's authority or involved a much lower class. They were the nuclear option, a terrifying tool to be used sparingly, but with maximum theatrical effect when the situation demanded it. They were the exception, not the rule. But they were a real exception, a possibility that lurked in the back of every potential lover's mind. The debate continues. Some historians lean towards the it was mostly a threat camp, while others argue that we underestimate the casual brutality of the age. We sift through the evidence, weighing the cold, dry law against the passionate, bloody poem, and we may never know the exact frequency. But we know the fear was real, the possibility was real, and for the unfortunate few who became the exception, the punishment was as real and as terrible as the stories claimed. The screams from the courtyard have faded, the grim work is done. The lover, in one form or another, has been dispatched, his body either broken or obliterated. But our story is not quite over. There is one final act in this tragedy, and it takes place in the quiet of the tower room where the lady is imprisoned. She has been a ghost in our story for some time, a passive spectator to the violent climax. But now, the focus returns to her. She is the reason for all of this, and the lesson of her lover's fate is, ultimately, for her. She does not see the punishment. She is spared the sight of the blood and the horror of the mutilation. But she hears it. The castle is a sounding board, and the thin, high window of her cell does little to block out the sounds from the courtyard below. She hears the muffled cries, the collective gasp of the crowd. She doesn't know the exact details, But her imagination, fueled by terror and guilt, paints a picture far more vivid and horrifying than any reality. And then comes the silence, a silence that is heavier and more final than any noise. Her husband's message is delivered to her, not in person, but through one of her stony-faced guards. It is a simple, factual report. The matter is concluded. Or perhaps, in a moment of calculated cruelty, he sends her a token, a lock of the lover's hair, a piece of his blood-stained tunic, a small, intimate object that proves the terrible finality of what has occurred. You are with her as this news sinks in. There is no storm of weeping, no passionate outburst. That part of her has been hollowed out. What is left is a cold, vast emptiness. She looks around her room, the comfortable bed, the fine tapestry, and she understands. This is her life now. A gilded cage, a comfortable tomb. Her lover's gruesome end is the final, ultimate threat. It is the period at the end of a very long and brutal sentence. It tells her, without words, what her life is now worth. Her husband has demonstrated the lengths he will go to protect his honor. He has shown her the price of transgression. Her own life was spared, not out of mercy, but because she is still a valuable asset. She is the mother of his children, the lady of his castle. But her spirit, her will, they are to be as dead as her lover. This is the core of the message. Her consequence is his fate. The pain inflicted upon his body is meant to be a permanent scar on her soul. Every day, for the rest of her life, she will remember the sounds from the courtyard. Every night, she will see his face in her dreams. Her husband has not laid a hand on her, but he has imprisoned her mind more effectively than any tower could imprison her body. What becomes of women in her position? History gives us a few different paths. Some were confined for the rest of their lives, either in a remote castle or, more commonly, sent to a convent. This was a convenient and pious solution. She could live out her days in prayer and penance, her shame hidden behind the high walls of the nunnery. It was a living death, but a respectable one. Other husbands, perhaps more pragmatic, might eventually allow their wives to resume their duties as lady of the castle, but the relationship would be forever changed. It would be a hollow performance, a public display of unity with a core of ice. She would be a two people bound together by a contract and a crime, living in an intimate state of mutual undeclared war. The castle is no longer their home, it is their shared prison. A fascinating debate among social historians is whether these events created a kind of secret society of women. Did they share stories, warnings, and strategies for survival in a world where their desires could lead to such catastrophic consequences? The records are almost entirely silent on this, written as they were by men. But it's not hard to imagine the whispered conversations between a mother and a daughter, an older lady-in-waiting and her young charge, urgent passing on of the rules of a very dangerous game. The lady in the tower looks out her narrow window. The sun is setting. The world outside goes on, but her world has ended. She understands now that her crime was not loving another man. Her crime was believing, for a brief, shining moment, that her heart was her own. And the punishment for that belief was to watch the man who showed her that possibility be utterly and completely destroyed. His fate is her life sentence. The blood has been washed from the cobblestones of the courtyard. The terrible instruments of punishment have been cleaned and put away. The lover is gone, a fading memory or a scattered warning. A quiet, heavy stillness settles over the castle. On the surface, the crisis is over. The Lord's honor, that fragile and essential commodity, has been paid for in full. It is, technically, restored, but the castle is now a different place, a place haunted by the echoes of what has happened. You walk through the halls in the days and weeks that follow. The atmosphere is subdued, tense. The servants move about their tasks with their eyes downcast, speaking in hushed tones. The knights in the yard practice their drills with a grim intensity, the usual banter and laughter absent. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows not to speak of it. The event has become a new, invisible wall in the center of their world, a wall they must all carefully navigate around. The husband resumes his duties as lord of the manor. He presides over the high table. He meets with his steward. He rides out to inspect his lands. He projects an aura of unshakable authority of business as usual. He has won. He has faced a challenge to his power and has crushed it completely. His reputation as a man not to be trifled with is now sealed in blood. His rivals will think twice before testing his borders. His vassals will be quicker to obey. His actions have been a success. But you, the silent observer, can see the cost when he sits in his great hall. His gaze is harder, his face set in permanent lines of suspicion. The trust he once had in his household, however conditional, is gone. He now looks at everyone, from the highest-ranking knight to the lowest kitchen boy, with a question in his eyes. He has restored order through fear, but fear is a brittle foundation upon which to build a life. And what of the lady? Let's imagine her husband has chosen the path of pragmatic reconciliation. She has been released from her hour. She once again takes her place by his side at the table. She wears the fine clothes of her station. Her hair is perfectly coiffed. Her expression is one of serene composure. To an outsider, a visiting dignitary, they are the very picture of a noble couple. But you can see the truth. She is a beautiful automaton, performing her duties with flawless precision but with no life in her eyes. The connection between her and her husband is now a chasm of unspoken words and shared, horrific memories. They are two people bound together by a contract and a crime, living in an intimate state of mutual undeclared war. The castle is no longer their home. It is their shared prison. There's a concept in psychology known as moral injury. It's a wound to the soul that occurs when someone participates in or witnesses acts that transgress their deeply held moral beliefs. It's different from fear or trauma. It's a shattering of one's sense of what is right and wrong. It's plausible to think that everyone who witnessed the punishment, from the lord to the lowest servant, suffered a form of this. They participated, even through their silence, in an act of brutal, calculated cruelty, and that leaves a mark. Historians who study the emotional lives of people in the past often grapple with this. We might question if they were as horrified by this violence as we are, or were they desensitized, living in a much harder, more brutal world? The answer is probably complex. They were certainly more accustomed to violence and public punishment, but that doesn't mean they were immune to its psychological effects. The grim silence that hangs over the castle suggests that the community, while accepting the necessity of the Lord's actions, is also wounded by it. The price of honor has been paid. The books have been balanced, but the payment has left the victor with an empty victory. The Lord has his honor back, but he has lost the possibility of peace in his own home. He has re-established his authority, but he has filled his castle with ghosts. The ghost of the lover, of course, but also the ghost of the woman his wife used to be, and the ghost of the man he was before his pride demanded such a terrible sacrifice. The castle is secure, its walls strong, but inside it is cold, quiet, and profoundly broken. The story does not end when the players are gone. It seeps into the stones of the castle, into the soil of the surrounding lands, and it begins a new life as a legend. The brutal, visceral event, once experienced by a few hundred people, is transformed into a cautionary tale for thousands. You are no longer inside the castle walls. You are in a smoky tavern in the nearby village years later. A fire crackles in the hearth. A traveling merchant, his face ruddy from the road and the ale, is telling a story to a rapt audience of farmers and artisans. He doesn't know all the details correctly. He embellishes the events, making the lady more beautiful, the lover more daring, the husband more monstrous. But the core of the story, the terrible lesson, remains intact. Or perhaps you are in the great hall of another castle, miles away. It is a winter evening, and a troubadour with a lute is singing a new ballad. It's a sad, mournful song. It doesn't use the real names of the lord or the lady. That would be far too dangerous. It calls them the falcon and the dove, or the rose of the north. The song speaks of their forbidden love in hushed, romantic tones and of the terrible, bloody price they paid. The listeners sigh, captivated by the romance and the tragedy. This is how history was transmitted for most people. Not through books, but through stories, songs, and gossip. And the story of our lovers is a perfect cautionary tale because it operates on multiple levels. For the common folk, the farmers and villagers, it is a stark reminder of the nobility and the dangers of crossing them. It's a lesson in knowing your place. The lover in these retellings is often portrayed as a fool, a man whose ambition and desire lead him to a predictable and gruesome end. The story reinforces the rigid social hierarchy that governs their lives. It says, "This is what happens when you reach for what is not yours." For the women of the village and the court, the story is a different kind of warning. It's whispered from mother to daughter. It is a lesson about the incredibly narrow path a woman must walk. It warns of the dangers of desire, of the catastrophic consequences of a single misstep. The lady in the story is often portrayed as a tragic, sympathetic figure, but also a foolish one. Her fate, a lifetime of gilded imprisonment, either in a tower or a loveless marriage, is a clear warning about the price of passion. It teaches them that a woman's honor is not her own. It is a fragile thing owned by her family, and to damage, it is to invite disaster upon everyone she loves. For the men of the court, the young knights and squires, the story is a lesson in politics and discretion. It's a reminder that even a private affair can have public, political consequences. It teaches them to be careful about whose eye they catch, whose wife they flatter. The lover's fate is a lesson in risk assessment. There's a fascinating genre of medieval literature called exempla. These were short, moralizing stories, often used by priests in their sermons to illustrate a point about sin and virtue. The story of the lovers, as it spreads and evolves, becomes a kind of secular exemplum. It's a sermon preached not from the pulpit but by the fireplace. Historians who study folklore and oral traditions are deeply interested in this process. They trace how a real historical event can be sanded down over time, its rough, complicated edges smoothed away until it becomes a simple, powerful myth. The lover becomes a stock character, the arrogant courtier. The lady becomes the unhappy wife. The husband becomes the jealous tyrant. The complex human beings are replaced by archetypes that serve the story's moral. And so the lover, who was so brutally and completely erased from the world, achieves a strange and anonymous kind of immortality. He lives on, not as himself, but as a warning. He is a ghost who haunts the imaginations of people far and wide. The story of what happened in that castle courtyard becomes a part of the cultural DNA of the region, a shared piece of knowledge, a dark fairy tale for adults, It is a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of everyday life, a reminder of the rules of the world and the terrible price for breaking them. The world does not stand still. Even the most rigid traditions, the most ancient customs, eventually bend to the slow, relentless pressure of time. The brutal private justice of the wronged husband, which seemed so absolute, begins a long, slow retreat in the face of a new and powerful idea. You find yourself moving forward in time. Decades, and then a century, have passed since the grim events in the castle courtyard. The castle itself may still stand, but the world around it has changed. The power of individual lords is gradually being eroded, consolidated into the hands of powerful kings and their centralized governments. And with this shift in power comes a shift in the philosophy of justice. A crime like adultery is slowly being redefined. In the old world, it was a personal offense, a crime against the husband. Now, in this new, more modern world, it is increasingly seen as a crime against the state, an offense against the king's peace. The king and his courts are asserting their monopoly on violence. A lord who decides to take justice into his own hands is no longer seen as a righteous patriarch, but as a rogue, a man who is undermining the authority of the crown. You are in a courtroom now. It is no longer the great hall of a castle, but a purpose-built chamber in a bustling town. The judge is not the wronged husband, but a professional, a man learned in the law, appointed by the king. There are lawyers, clerks, and written records. The process is still weighted by class and influence, but it is a process nonetheless. The punishment for the lover has also changed. The spectacular, symbolic mutilations, the blinding, the castration, are becoming rarer, seen as barbaric and archaic. They are being replaced by punishments that are less theatrical, but which serve the interests of the new, centralizing state. The most common punishment is now a fine, a very large, very painful fine. The lover, if found guilty, would be required to pay a huge sum of money, not to the husband, but to the court, which is to say, to the king. This is a brilliant innovation from the state's perspective. It turns crime into a source of revenue. Justice becomes profitable. The husband might still receive a portion of the fine as compensation for the damage he has sustained, but the lion's share goes to the crown. The focus has shifted from symbolic vengeance to financial penalty. Exile is another increasingly common sentence. The lover is banished from the realm for a period of years, or even for life. This neatly removes the problem without the messy and unpopular spectacle of a public mutilation. It satisfies the husband's need to have the rival gone, and it demonstrates the power of the king's court to decide who can and cannot live within its borders. And what of the church's involvement? The ecclesiastical courts continue to hear these cases as well, treating adultery not as a crime, but as a sin. Their punishments are spiritual. The lover and the lady might be sentenced to public penance. They might have to stand at the church door for weeks, barefoot and dressed in a simple white sheet, confessing their sin to everyone who enters. They might be ordered to go on a long and arduous pilgrimage, or to fast on bread and water for an extended period. The goal of the church is not to punish the body, but to save the soul and, not incidentally, to demonstrate its own authority. This leads to a confusing and often overlapping legal landscape, a situation historians refer to as legal pluralism. For the same offense, you could theoretically be tried in the Lord's court, the king's court, and the church's court. It created a complex system where clever litigants could play one jurisdiction against another. This slow march of the law is not a smooth or steady progression. It happens in fits and starts. There are periods of backlash where powerful nobles reassert their old privileges. In some remote, lawless regions, the old ways of private vengeance persist for centuries. But the general trend is clear. Justice is becoming less personal, less spectacular, and more institutionalized. The story of our lover, the one who was so brutally punished, becomes an old tale, a story from the bad old days. People might hear it and shudder, thankful that they live in a more civilized, more lawful age. The slow, grinding machinery of bureaucracy is replacing the swift, passionate slash of the wronged husband's sword. The world is becoming, in some ways, a safer place, but perhaps also a little more gray. And so we are left here in the quiet aftermath of our long and oft brutal story. The echoes of the lover's fate have faded, replaced by the dry rustle of legal parchments and the murmur of prayers for penance. We have traveled from a world of passionate, private vengeance to one of institutional, impersonal justice. And now, in the stillness, we are left to ponder the strange, alien logic of the world we have just visited. Take a moment to simply float in this quiet space. Feel the distance between your world and theirs. The central conflict of our story, adultery, is still a source of pain and betrayal in our own time. But the reaction to it, the very framework for understanding it, could not be more different. Try to hold the medieval husband's worldview in your mind, not to condone it, but to understand it. He sees his wife not as a partner, but as a territory. He sees her lover not as a rival for her heart, but as a trespasser on his land. His rage is not the simple, hot-blooded jealousy we see in modern dramas. It is a cold, calculated fury over a breach of contract, a challenge to his authority, a stain on his public reputation. His honor is not a feeling, it is a political, and he defends it with the same ruthlessness he would use to defend his castle walls. This worldview is built on a foundation of concepts that feel utterly foreign to us. A world where marriage is a business merger, where a woman's virtue is a family's property, where a man's life has a specific price based on his social class, where God is a tangible presence who intervenes directly in human affairs through ordeals and trials by combat. It's a world that is both fiercely devout and astonishingly violent. A world of beautiful poetry and brutal, symbolic punishments. The punishments themselves, which seem to us like the work of monsters, were, in their own time, imbued with a terrible logic. They were not random acts of cruelty. They were carefully chosen symbols, a form of communication written on the human body. The eyes that looked with lust are blinded. The body that threatened the bloodline is unmanned. The traitor who sought to tear the kingdom apart is literally torn apart. It is a language of violence, but it is a language with its own grammar and its own syntax. And what about the lady? In the poems and romances, she is the star, the object of desire, the catalyst for the whole affair. But in the grim reality of the law and the punishment, she becomes almost a bystander to her own fate. The conflict is between the two men, the husband and the lover. It is a struggle for dominance, and she is the contested prize. Her own desires, her own humanity, are erased from the equation. Her punishment is not a swift, but a slow, quiet suffocation of the spirit. This entire narrative, this whole system of honor, vengeance, and property, is something historians still struggle to fully grasp. We can analyze the social structures and the political realities, but to truly feel what it was like to live inside that mindset, to believe so profoundly in the tangible nature of honor that you would inflict or endure such things, That is a leap of imagination that is almost impossible to make. It reminds us that the past is not just a version of the present with different clothes and worse sanitation. It is, as one writer famously said, a foreign country. They do things differently there. As you rest here, let these thoughts drift. Don't try to judge the husband or pity the lover or condemn the society. Just observe it like a strange and complex ecosystem from a distant planet. Recognize how the values we hold as self-evident, the importance of individual happiness, the primacy of love in marriage, the idea of universal human rights are not timeless truths. They are the product of a long, slow, and often painful history. They are ideas that had to be fought for, and that were built upon the ruins of a world that operated on a very different and very terrifying set of rules. And so we arrive at the final and perhaps the most profound irony of our story. The very thing that was the cause of all this horror, the love between two people, chosen freely and felt deeply, was not an eternal crime. It was just a crime in its own time. And that powerful, dangerous, illicit idea would one day stage the most successful coup in human history, overthrowing the entire system of contracts and alliances to become the very foundation of modern marriage. How did this happen? How did love transform from a scandalous, storybook fantasy into the central expectation of our lives? It was not a single event, but a slow, quiet revolution of the heart unfolding over centuries. You can see the earliest seeds of it, paradoxically, in the very thing that seemed to contain it, the idea of courtly love. That game of stolen glances and secret poems, which we saw had such fatal consequences, was also a space, perhaps the only space in that rigid world where the idea of love as a personal, passionate choice was kept alive. It was fantasies are powerful. They create a longing. The songs and stories told people that a different kind of connection was possible, even if it was forbidden. It planted an idea in the cultural imagination, a seed in a very cold and hostile ground. For centuries, that seed lay dormant. Then, slowly, the climate began to change. The rise of new ways of thinking during the Reformation and the Enlightenment began to place a new emphasis on the individual. The idea that personal happiness was a worthy goal, that the inner life of a person mattered, began to take root. Thinkers and philosophers started talking about the companion-ate marriage, a union based not just on property, but on friendship, respect, and mutual affection. And then came a new and powerful technology, the novel. In the 18th and 19th centuries, for the first time, stories about the inner lives of ordinary people became widely available. You could pick up a book and live for hundreds of pages inside the mind of a young woman trying to navigate the complex rules of society to find a partner she could genuinely love. These novels provided a script. They taught people a new emotional language. They normalized the idea that your choice of a life partner was the most important decision you would ever make, and that it should be based on your own feelings. Historians, as always, gently disagree on when this shift truly took hold. Some argue that poorer people who had less land and property to worry about were marrying for affection long before the aristocracy gave up their strategic alliances. Others point to the 19th century with its Victorian ideal of the family as a sanctuary of love in a heartless industrial world as the real turning point. It wasn't a neat, clean transition. For a long time, love and duty were angled together, with families still expecting their children to make a sensible choice, one that was both loving and financially sound. But the direction of travel was clear. The world of the wronged husband with his cold calculus of honor and property was fading. The world of the lovers with their belief in a personal, transcendent connection was slowly, impossibly winning. Imagine our two lovers, the clerk and the lady, as ghosts visiting our modern world. They would be utterly bewildered. They would see a world where people spend years searching for their soulmate, where they write their own vows, where they build their entire lives around the very feeling that got them destroyed. Their crime has become our ideal. Their tragedy has become our fairy tale. And the brutal, unforgiving world they knew has dissolved, leaving behind only this quiet, powerful, almost universal belief in the right to love. And so the tale dissolves. The figures of the lady, the lover, and the husband fade like smoke into the long, deep corridors of the past. Let the images from their world begin to soften now, the cold stone of the castle walls growing warm and indistinct, the sharp edge of the executioner's blade melting into a blur, the sounds from the courtyard fading into the gentle, rhythmic hum of the quiet room you are in now. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to hold on to. The story has done its work. It was a bridge to a distant time. And now we have crossed back over, leaving that foreign country behind. You can let the weight of its history drift away from you now, like a heavy cloak slipping from your shoulders. All that remains is the simple, comfortable weight of your own body, the feeling of the blankets around you, the gentle rise and fall of your own breath. The past can rest. The landscape of the story has given way to the soft, open landscape of your own impending dream. Our narrative has reached its peaceful end. It's okay if you're still here with me. Feel free to press play on another journey, or simply enjoy this deep and comfortable quiet. Good night.